I know that it's honestly kind of pointless to try and tell the internet that when I'm critical of a game, it's more often than not coming from a place of love, or at least from a position of generally liking the title in question. I feel like I can say I like Persona 5 and Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy IV for the rest of my natural and unnatural life, and I would still get people making casual comments about how I hate these games, but I do just want to state for the record that I do, in fact, like Final Fantasy IV. I mean, how could I not? Not only is Final Fantasy IV absolutely iconic, but I've said before, and will say again, that all mainline Final Fantasies are good, actually, and that does include this one. I just think it's one of the safest titles in the series. I had a friend once tell me that he's never met someone who loves video games and despises fans of video games as much as me, and while that still haunts me to this day, I really am kicking this off by, talking about the folks that I know who consider Final Fantasy IV the best of the series. I can understand the appeal of this title. I can understand people calling it their favorite, sort of. There's a lot of good going for this title, and I don't want to just ignore that to suit my own agenda. Final Fantasy IV has a really epic quality to it, spanning 3 different world maps, 3 airships, a hovercraft, a drill, 12 playable characters, 8 crystals. Final Fantasy III also had 8 crystals, but half of those showed up in the Goblin Tower, so whatever. Look, the game goes through on some level every significant element of the 3 games prior. Class changes, betrayals, edgy anti-hero characters, character deaths, the fake character deaths, romance, Odin and Bahamut are in it. It is, in many ways, people can see this as the title where a lot of what we understand of Final Fantasy of Eld really comes together. I mean, you go to the freaking moon, right? This epic scale, the grand journey, the newfangled ATB system where you're sort of doing an RPG in pseudo real-time, while this was not my entry into the series, I can put the pieces back together and come to appreciate what this game must have been to people as an experience that really did define an era of this long-running series made by a company that, well, I like the dev team for Final Fantasy, at least. Look, I really do want to put together what I like most of this game up front. Partially because I'm very defensive about being lumped in with folks that make a career out of hating video games, and also because it will kind of help me make my arguments down the line. And I think that a lot of the mechanical changes made to the system were really ambitious. I know the title of the video talks about how safe a game this is, but that really doesn't apply to the kind of effort they put into making this ATB system, forcing folks to use front and back row mechanics, and building a game whose mechanical experience is a constant adjusting and readjusting of your party. Because of how carefully crafted this game is, it also helps to provide players with a pretty uniform, shared experience. Where the first 3 titles all run the risk of having very disparate progressions through it, some folks getting lost and not knowing, the good exploits to get through the games, like suboptimal builds, parties, whatever. By and large, the experience of Final Fantasy IV gets to be maintained, short of your personal investment in how much to grind your party, how and when you find secret stuff, and, so on. Putting it all together, you're left with a game that feels epic and curates its experience, and, that also got released overseas, so all the pieces do make sense together insofar as Final Fantasy IV, iconic title in the series goes. However, I do have some problems, obviously. So, right out the gate, I'm gonna do mechanics, of course. I just need to lean into it by now, but I'll be brief. The party system. I just talked about how the party system in Final Fantasy works to help unify the experience a little more, right? Your party changes at set points in your progression through the game, so no matter your choices, short of, I guess, exploiting glitches in the GBA remake that lets you customize your party before the last dungeon, your party will be set for you. Additionally, your casters will learn spells based on their level, save for plot moments like Rydia learning Fire, Rosa learning Teleport, and Edge learning Flood and Blitz. This further refines and limits your party's flexibility, and while none of this is bad per se, the experience of Final Fantasy IV can feel very guided, and that's an interesting shift in the trajectory of the game, and it's one that and I know how it sounds coming from someone who stands Final Fantasy XIII. The series as a whole seems a little reticent to replicate the kind of structure that Final Fantasy IV brought about. So, yes, games like Final Fantasy X and 13 have a very strict progression through it, but how you get to go through it still does get to feel more like your choices, like how to grow each party member or who to bring into each battle. They aren't the kind of big, sweeping flexibility choices you usually see, at least, until later in the game when they open up even further, but the series kind of understands that one of the joys of these games is your creative input in how to approach it. So much so that the GBA remake put in the choice to customize your party in the endgame anyway. It's not even that big of a change, considering that your white and black mages have functionally the exact same kit of spells, outside of, like, the Twins' special twin cast, and Rydia's summons, and, Rosa's bow. And the physical fighters are all almost indistinguishable from each other, since they're basically just here to hit thing with weapon. But, like, I don't know, even that feels a little more open, unless you be, I don't know, a little sick freak and have Edward kill Zeromus, and I'm kinda here for that. The other issue this choice brings for me is that knowing how the game progresses and what you need to get there can strip a lot of the artifice away, so to speak. At the start of the game, there's basically no reason to grind or explore, because anything you find now you can always find later, and it's always kind of trivial stuff, potions, tents, etc. And any experience you can gain from this is similarly pointless, since Cecil the Dark Knight and Kain will not carry over their experience like this. Kain has to rejoin at a later point in the game with a different set of stats and equipment, and Dark Knight Cecil gets his levels fully reset when he converts to a paladin. Rydia, when she joins, will rejoin later with different stuff. Rosa rejoins, Edward leaves the party forever, Tella is only there briefly. Yang is your longest running character at this point, leaving and rejoining relatively quickly, but he's not a long-term investment either. This effect isn't super significant in the grand scheme of things. You'll probably still need to level folks up to get through the struggles of this game, but you also already know that whatever the challenge is, if it's a part of the main story, then you already have the tools to beat it on hand. And if it's optional content, the most you can really do is maybe try it again with Kain in your party, except for the Bahamut one. You should fight Bahamut with Fusoya. Again, this isn't bad per se, but the effect can be a little dampening, feeling like the game is leading you through a carefully crafted journey instead of really letting you feel like you're planning out how to proceed. Short of early game levels just to get, like, Rydia and Edward into a usable place, there isn't really a great deal of powerful flexibility you can apply to your team. In theory, there's equipment choices for your party. Cecil can, put on a bow and go into the back row and be like a support extra healer type, but he can't. Like, not really. He gets a very limited amount of white magic, not enough to meaningfully keep up with the healing requirements of late-game enemies, so outside of that being perhaps a solid strategy for the Magnet Cave, all of your characters inevitably funnel into their predestined positions. That isn't necessarily a problem, but as someone who loves the creativity and flexibility of the game, feeling like the dominant strategy of Final Fantasy IV is so hard-coded that there's almost nothing you can really do to fight against it, outside of playing the game in a way that's obviously, like, against its intent, I don't know. Going further into this, the game's story can get odd to parse at times. I kind of have the impulse to be cautious and engaging with this because it is an old game, but it is a game that wrote a story with specific characters, motivations, and conflicts, and a lot of those are good in a lot of places. Like, let's talk about Tella, the old sage you meet trying to find his daughter. He gets to Damson to find her dying. She shielded Edward from Baron's attack, sacrificing herself to save him. In a fit of rage, after beating up Edward a little, Tella swears revenge on the man in charge, Golbez. You meet Tella again in Mount Ordeals, where he's trying to learn the secrets of Meteor, a spell powerful enough to destroy Golbez. He's warned that seeking revenge like this would destroy him, and it does. He confronts Golbez at the Tower of Zot, overexerts himself by casting Meteor, and he dies. And worst of all, his efforts, short of giving Cecil a chance to save Rosa and Kain, can't even kill Golbez. They couldn't even get a crystal back from him after that, just barely pulling together to get Rosa and Kain and get out. It's kind of a great character beat, and in general, the game is pretty good at this. Like, each character that's part of your team really gets a nice moment to help establish and develop their characters. Kain has a dark redemption arc thing. Edward finds a way to help the party after feeling like a burden. Cecil will get to him. Edge deals with the death of his parents. Yang, Palamon Porum, Rosa, look, it's a good effort, okay? Like, there is a desire to make a good, solid progression for at least some of the characters, and the ones that didn't get it are usually more notable by being big personalities, or the woman in the center of a love triangle. I'm really trying to establish the elements of the game story that do work and make the experience genuinely entertaining, because we're about to talk about Cecil, and I am sorry. So, Cecil starts the game off as a tool of the Empire, a Dark Knight sent to raze Mysidia to the ground and steal their crystal. After doing all of that, Cecil questions his position in the army, which removes him from command, and gets him sent on a mission to Mist, where he and Kane travel together, accidentally kill Rydia's mother, and also accidentally sets fire to her village, razing it to the ground. Now, Cecil journeys from there to redeem himself, turns into a paladin, has the capacity to use the crystal at the game with a heart full of light in order to defeat the final boss of the game. Like, this isn't to say that the game is, like, problematic or weird to let someone who's been a participant of Imperial conquest, like, be the shining light in the dark, so to speak, but the way the story engages in his journey is strange. Like, Cecil in his travels gets attacked by Leviathan, the thing that breaks up the party pretty badly, with Rydia, Yang, and Edward supposedly dying in the attack. Cecil wakes up alone off the coast of Mysidia. Uh-oh. Like, but then he talks to the village elder, who tasks him to go to Mount Ordeals to become a paladin, an act that will prove that he's a good person, and it does. Like, the light at the peak of Mount Ordeals is apparently Cecil's father, who gives him a fancy sword and turns him into a paladin, which the game takes as a means to wash away his past. And, like, look, I get it. It's a hard narrative to sit with, and God forbid I try to be the voice that tells a game how it should have gone. But if the notion of redemption as a means of personal growth and forgiveness wasn't contrasted so starkly with Kane's narrative, we really wouldn't be here. Like, Cecil and Golbez do horrible things in the course of this game, and both get to pivot pretty painlessly, relatively speaking, into doing good things for the sake of the world, and with the support of the party. Like, this isn't the game literally endorsing the idea that committing atrocities is just water under the bridge if you realize that what you did was wrong, and it even hints at that from time to time in the narrative, but I don't know. Am I the only one who finds it weird that this happens alongside Kane? The man who, when he's control of his own mind, seems to be constantly berating himself for the acts of treachery he commits, while Golbez has him mind-controlled. Like, he explains that a lot of that, like, is that he is still somewhat conscious of his own actions, and that they, in part, stemmed from a desire he knows to be wrong. But the party treats him with a lot of tense suspicion for someone who has really only hampered their plans minimally, and not really even in his own mind. You know, compared to how the party treats Golbez turning good at the end. And this isn't even to talk about Cecil, part dragon, part moon person, Dark Knight with a tragic fate turned paladin with a hot GF with pure light in his heart, something that neither Golbez nor Fusoya could have. It just paints Cecil into a position of being good on an inherent level that strikes me as oddly incurious. As it stands now, it's fine, but it lingers in my mind as a narrative beat that the game doesn't want to really address or have you think about. It plays its story pretty safely, like shooting instead for grand-scale whimsy, and there's nothing outwardly wrong with that. But again, this is more directed at the idea of this being the pinnacle of the series, when there are games that are every bit as grand and overwhelming and have a greater sense of care with the characters wrapped up in the narrative. Now, to close off with our PR chat at the end, I want to bring up something I said in the previous video, and how Final Fantasy III and IV are the only games on Steam that survived the purge of their previous releases. And where Final Fantasy III invented new characters entirely to retell the story, Final Fantasy IV's Steam remake is closer to the Pixel remaster than, say, Final Fantasy IV Advance, my favorite version, by the way. At least at first glance. Like, I made a joke that this version gets to live alongside the Pixel remaster because of, I don't know, I said something about Yuri Lowenthal, but to be fair, I will try and list all the things unique to the Steam or DS version of Final Fantasy IV. I'm sorry. I think that part of what could have kept it alive was the rehauling of the battle system in the DS version, where the party, while remaining fixed, could be edited? Wow, if I slur that, like, that just kind of blurs together. If I don't, could be edited with augments. Edited with augments, fuck me. basically abilities left behind from temporary party members that you can then put on someone else. Putting them on temporary party members make them drop more abilities when they leave, but the idea is to give you the best of both worlds, the capacity to retain the iconic fixed party while giving you a flexible approach to what they get to be. This, plus the voice acting, the pretty opening, the naming way quest chain, the Lost Babel fight, you can sort of piece together an idea of why the Pixel Remaster may not cut it, but that doesn't really sit right with me. Like, 4 games in means the sample size is a little small still, granted, but knowing that this version has a lot of other things isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule here, where, like, they aren't, to my knowledge, selling the old iOS versions of Final Fantasy 1 and 2 anymore, and those versions were more in line with the PSP versions, which had more content, more bosses, the Chronodia dungeon in Final Fantasy 1, an entire labyrinth that removed certain actions from your party, and in Final Fantasy 2, aside from that, like, weird keyword dungeon I don't really get, more recent versions of Final Fantasy II included an entire epilogue story called Soul of Rebirth, where you play as Minwu, Scott, Joseph, and Rickard in the afterlife. Like, there's a lot of stuff there. Not even getting into the new classes developed for Final Fantasy V Advanced and the post-game dungeons in both 5 and 6 that are also dropped out of Steam. Like, having more stuff in it doesn't seem to matter as much as the kind of new stuff. So, all in all, Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster kind of frustrates me. Where the Pixel Remasters for 2 and 3 had compelling arguments to exist, to, like, give us either a more comfortable entry into a hard installment in the series, or to give us a peek into what the original experience could be, respectively, Final Fantasy IV PR feels very close to Final Fantasy IV Advance, while leaving out the stuff I really liked about it. It's a smoother experience, and, you know, arrows are infinite, so it was pretty cool to just have Rosa spam Yoichi arrows, like, guiltlessly, but... And this is really where my credentials fall apart here, because I didn't play the original release of this game. It feels odd being an outsider on a game that I know well, but without experiencing it properly, so to speak. A lot of what this version was aimed at misses me, because my relationship to Final Fantasy IV has quietly been removed from the market and replaced with 2 different camps. The complex, oftentimes sadistic Yuri Lowenthal beast of a remake, or this very clean, very painless recreation of other people's nostalgia. Special thanks to Brandon Haney, Caitlin Fisher, Colleen T, Dector A, Evan Kearns, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Alistair V, Natalie Lane Baker, Nurai the Redmarked, Bahor, Professor Bopper, Saint Rawberry, Thomas Vulpes, and Zetetic.